we got a problem. The world's about to get a whole lot more Nissan Altima drivers. Why? Because PXN just made the entry level to sim racing way too low. For just $189, you get a surprising good force feedback base paired with a nice grippy rubber wheel, just the way I like it. You also get a gated shifter that makes you feel fancy, wishing your Civic had one. And saving the best for last, the bundle includes pedals with a clutch and featuring Hall effect sensors, so hopefully they survive the abuse you're about to dish out, unlike a Nissan's transmission. This is everything you get in the PXN V99 Bundle, which sets you up with a solid sim racing kit. All that's left is a desk or a rig to mount it on. I went with a $50 rig off Amazon, which I do not recommend. It's bad, but it does get the job done. Before you can start driving into oncoming traffic, you need to set everything up. There are two different ways to hook up the PXN V90 depending on what you're using, a console or PC. Setting up the PXN V90 on console is straightforward. First, you want to gather up all the included wires that it comes with your bundle, then start by positioning your pedals and shifter to the spot you would like it in. Then connect the Cat6 cable from both the pedals and shifter into the respective ports on the back of the wheelbase. Next, plug in the DC power cable into the wheelbase, enabling the force feedback function. After that, connect the controller of choice, either Xbox for Xbox or a PS4 controller for PS4. Then connect the controller to the wheelbase itself. Finally, connect the wheelbase to your console using the included cable. Once your console is powered on and everything is plugged in, the steering wheel will automatically calibrate, and you're all set to start driving probably the slowest car you own. Now, if you want to hook this up to your PC, it's a bit different. Instead of plugging the shifter and pedals into the back of the base, you need to plug them directly into the PC. This way, your computer can recognize them as separate hardware modules. Once you do that, just follow the rest of the previous setup, connecting the power cable to the base, then plug the base into the PC, and you're good to go. Now that we got this epic gaming setup, while I was trying to set up the steering wheel, I came across some problems. For console use, everything was pretty simple. Occasionally, I did have to unplug the controller and plug it back in to get the console to recognize it. But after that, it was smooth sailing. Where I ran into trouble was with the PC setup. Initially, I followed the manual, which says that all you need is the cable from the base to the PC, and that it did work, but for some reason the PC wouldn't recognize the shifter or clutch. After digging around YouTube, I realized I just needed to plug them in separately. The next problem was force feedback. According to the manual, there are two modes on the steering wheel. There's the X drive mode and the D drive mode. The default is the D drive mode and the secondary mode is the X drive. If you hold down the button for 3 seconds, it enters the X drive mode, where the center light turns purple, and this should work on most PC games. But for some reason, the force feedback didn't work at all in this mode. Being the genius that I am, I missed the fine print saying that the force feedback wouldn't be active in this mode. Once I found that out, I switched it back to the original mode, had to go back into each game and reconfigure it because the configures were a little different. Don't know why, but it is what it is. Both modes are completely separate, I guess. Then we got into some gaming. The first game I tried out was Assetto Corsa, which worked right away with the force feedback, but Forza Horizon took a bit more convincing. Let's just say I had to unplug everything 1,000 times before the force feedback finally kicked in. This seemed to be the case with both Forza Horizon and Forza Motorsport. Everything about the wheel just did not vibe with this game. By the way, this is only happening on my PC. This is only to do with PC. I also experienced some weird input issues in these games, but switching between the two modes on the steering wheel seemed to fix it. With the same theme, I encountered some strange issues where the steering wheel wouldn't recognize in Forza. To solve it, all you need to do is toggle between the two modes. As I mentioned earlier, it might take a bit of trial and error, but eventually it works. Now, let's center our attention to the steering wheel itself. It's a solid piece of hardware. but not without its oddities. The button layout is a bit wonky, and I kept hitting B or Y by accident since I'm used to the Xbox layout, which, you know, has the buttons in a circle, not all over the place like it's a puzzle. Also, the buttons feel like something you would find on a third-party controller. Nothing amazing, but it does get the job done. It reminds me of when you go over to your friend's house and they hand you like the most generic Walmart brand third-party controller. It works, but the buttons don't feel great. Then there's also the design of the wheel itself. The two humps at the top, not really necessary. A thicker rim or a different shape would have done a better job, like the previous version, the V10. Or just, you know, make it a normal steering wheel and add the buttons in. I don't know. I'm not a big fan of how the steering wheel lays out. It's just not my type of style. But here's where it gets interesting. The paddles. These things are amazing. The top two paddles are super clicky, which I love. They feel fantastic when you're driving a dual clutch car or just having some fun. The bottom paddles feel more like the triggers you would find on an Xbox or a PlayStation controller than the typical paddles you would find on a shifter. I didn't mind them and they still work. In my case, I even used them as an e-brake since I didn't have a detachable e-brake for the setup. But you know what's even better is the paddles are made out of metal, giving them a higher quality feel that you wouldn't expect at this price point. Now, moving on to the base, this looks like a direct drive unit, but it's not. It uses dual motors for the force feedback, which is great, though the steering can feel a bit slow at some times. After long sessions, the base does heat up, and in some cases, the force feedback will randomly cut out. Personally, I think it's because of the motors getting too hot, and once you let them cool down, it starts working again without a problem. The force feedback feels fantastic, and it does exactly what it should, forcing you off the road when you hit grass or gravel, and honestly, the force feedback is the best part of this setup. Another thing to mention is the wheelbase comes with its own clamps. They are fantastic and they work extremely well, and it's actually how I have mine secured to my rig. The wheelbase also features fully adjustable tilt, allowing you to customize it to your liking. Personally, I have it tilted fully up, which gives me a much better feel while driving. You can also screw the wheelbase directly into your rig or mounting surface for added security. And let's not forget that PXN provides a fully functional companion app for this wheelbase. It's available on the Play Store or Apple Store. The app allows you to fine-tune everything from the acceleration, clutch, and brakes to the force feedback, so you can dial in the perfect settings. In my experience, 40% force feedback is a great all-around sweet spot, but when I'm just having some fun, I fully max out the force feedback, which you can really feel it. Another great feature of the app is the ability to test all the buttons, paddles, shifter, and wheelbase itself to make sure everything is working correctly. On a few occasions, I thought my device died on me, which I wouldn't be surprised sometimes, to be honest. Some of the stuff I get from people or companies just die, and I'm like, oh, okay. But it doesn't happen very much. But I was able to confirm that everything was functioning fine, and it turned out just to be a PC issue. Of course, you know, the steering wheel just stops working. I'm like, what's going on? And it's my computer, not the wheel itself. Let's move on to the shifter. Honestly, this is probably the weakest part of the bundle. The shifter itself is fantastic, but it just feels cheap. Running for the gears is satisfying, but getting into reverse can be a bit tough. The overall build quality is mainly plastic, which makes it feel a bit cheap. But hey, it's gated, so that's a nice touch. Plus, you also get a high and low gear option or games with more than 6-speed transmissions. If you're not primarily buying this for the shifter, you'll be fine. Finally, the pedals. These are pretty decent. They use a hollow effect design, which hopefully means that they will last longer than analog pedals. On the downside, they do feel a bit spongy, definitely not as stiff as you would expect in a higher end sim setup. That being said, they're not as bad as something you would find on an arcade machine or your Nissan. I did have some issues with them occasionally not responding when I powered on my Xbox or PC, but a quick unplug and replug in seemed to fix it. On the plus side, the pedal design is pretty unique. almost like a diffuser up front. They are pretty comfortable to rest your feet on, which I had no complaints. You can adjust the pedals positions a bit, but not too much, enough to customize it to your liking. I moved the gas and brake to the right and moved the clutch to the left, which felt more natural for my driving style. But outside of that, there's not a whole lot more customization you can do to the pedals. You can also move the pedals up, which would give you a better range if you have taller feet or if you position the pedals on a down incline. But outside of that, that's pretty much all the customization you get with these. So after all that, what's the verdict? For $189 plus shipping and handling, you get a complete sim setup for less than what most brands cost for just the entry-level wheel. PXN has nailed the force feedback on this thing. It feels better than what you get from Logitech or Thrustmaster at the same price point. While there are some quirks with the pedals, the shifter, and the setup issue, honestly the best part of this whole setup is the base and wheel. They're fantastic. I had a blast with the PXN V90. It's definitely a better value than other offerings. In fact, it works with all consoles except PS5 for some reason, which makes it so much better of a deal compared to like Logitech, where you have to buy two different versions if you want to use it on PS5 or PS4 or Xbox. That being said, if you're looking for a steering wheel setup and you're on a budget, I highly recommend the PXN V90. I've been having a ton of fun with it, and since I got this bad boy before the holidays, I was able to show it to my friends and family, which were coming up, of course, around Christmas and stuff, so they even racked up more hours than I have on it. So if you're curious about whether or not to pull the trigger, you should go for it. This thing will not disappoint.